Since the war broke out on October 6th, the Israeli-Palestinian crisis has been in the forefront of the news and also in the hearts of many in this room. Although the current crisis was a long time in the making, many don't have a good understanding of how present day came to be. And as in many matters of history, there is more than one perspective, more than one story to be told. While we can't provide extensive information in the time allotted for a Rotary program, we have invited two prominent leaders in our community to deepen our understanding of the region's unique history, politics, economies, and more. Last week, we heard from Miryam Rosenzweig, President and CEO of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. Today, we will hear from Othman Atta, Executive Director of the Islamic Society of Milwaukee, who will approach the conversation from the Palestinian perspective. After Othman speaks, our program committee chair, Jamie Reeve, will pose the questions to our speaker. We will not take live questions from the floor. Jamie is still collecting questions at the back of the room for a few more minutes. He's right back there waving his hand if you have one you want to bring to him. As I turn to the program, I want to acknowledge that these are challenging conversations. Some of us may hear things that make us uncomfortable or things with which we do not agree. I personally intend to listen respectfully with the intention of learning something new. I hope that you share that intention with me. Now, turning to our program, please welcome Janan Najib, President of the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition and our 2022 Rotary Person of the Year, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President Leslie, and good afternoon, everyone. Hello, fellow Rotarians in the room. I am really pleased and honored to introduce our speaker today. Othman Atta is a Palestinian born in Jerusalem, born to Palestinian families whose ancestry traces hundreds of years. Othman has served as president of the executive board of the Islamic Society of Milwaukee, and he is currently serving as its executive director. The Islamic Society of Milwaukee is the largest Muslim organization in Wisconsin and operates 3 mosques and a full-time K-4 through 12 school on 2 campuses in the Milwaukee area. It is one of the largest Islamic schools in the country. To remain connected to young people, which is a passion of his, he volunteers and teaches a contemporary issues class to the high school seniors. Othman worked as an attorney in private practice for over 20 years. He is a former advisory board member for Marquette University Law School. He's a former representative of the Islamic Society of Milwaukee on the board of the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. And he's a former adjunct faculty member at the former Cardinal Stritch University. He taught courses on the religious culture of Islam, and he has taught numerous courses on Islam and Middle East politics for UW Extension. He's a recipient of the Wisconsin Chapter ACLU Civil Libertarian of the Year Award. He is a recipient of the Wisconsin Law Journal's Leader in the Law Award. He's a former member of the FBI Civil Rights Advisory Group. He's a graduate of the FBI Citizen Academy and Milwaukee Police Department Citizen Academy as well. He's a former commissioner for the Milwaukee Commission on Police Community Relations. He's a former board member of the Wisconsin chapter of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, and he has delivered scores of speeches at the local, national, and national conferences, and he's participated in hundreds of lectures, panel discussions, and debates on a variety of topics addressing business, interfaith, law, and other groups. He's been a guest on a wide variety of media, both radio, television, and newspaper. He's married with 4 children, but his real claim to fame is that I'm his sister. Please welcome Othman.
Good morning, everyone. Or good afternoon, is it? I'm sorry. Good afternoon. I'm sorry. I'm still maybe it's frozen a little bit this weather. It's nice to be back here. I came here and delivered a lecture some years ago. This is during the time when the Taliban were ruling Afghanistan, and there was a discussion about what was going on and the war on terror and whatever else. So that was obviously a number of years ago. It's my pleasure really to be back here again. I really want to thank Margaret and Leslie and everyone here. It's really important, in my view, for people to have multiple views and perspectives on difficult issues. I am going to today present to you specifically about the Palestinian narrative. Now, I cannot give you all the history and all the politics and all the issues in 30 minutes. I do, and I have prepared a lot of slides. Usually, if I speak less than an hour, I don't like to prepare slides, but I did so. I was encouraged to do so. But I have an ambitious goal to cover a lot of things today. Some of the things I say may be troubling to you. Some of you may find it offensive. My goal is to get you to think. One thing that's very, very important is I encourage you on this particular issue to actually listen to different narratives, including the Israeli Zionist narratives. I want you to educate yourself, not through CNN or Fox News or Instagram, but actually reading material and covering a scholarly material that will give you a real picture of what has actually taken place. I have a couple books, some that I actually list inside the slides that are encouraging you, some by Palestinian scholars, one by also a Jewish scholar, and there's so many more that you can actually read. But it's important to educate yourself on all sides. I am 100% confident that if someone has full access to information, if they are not censored or if they are not intimidated or accused of being something, if they take a particular point of view, I believe that you will come to an understanding that what is going on in Palestine and Israel is really a tragedy, and that the Palestinians have suffered for a very, very long time. And it is well timed that there is a resolution that is both peaceful and that is just. So I'm going to start, see if I have this. Did I press the wrong one? Oh, maybe I turned it off. Okay, there it goes. All right. So, my presentation basically involves how did we get to the point where you have the destruction of what was Palestine and the creation of Israel. Some people try to say this is a long, complicated issue. It's been going on for thousands of years to try to discourage people maybe from trying to understand it. I don't believe it's very complicated, and it is not a long conflict that's been going on for thousands of years, as I will actually explain. The most important thing is that the international world body has allowed this issue to fester for decades. From the time that Israel was created, there has been no resolution to what has happened to the Palestinians. From the time that Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, there has been a continuous occupation, a brutal military occupation of Palestinians. So you have Israeli Jews that are military occupying and denying the freedom for millions of Palestinians. And that is the crux of the problem, and the fact that nobody, not the United Nations, not the US government, not the Israeli government or other leaders, have brought about a peaceful resolution is where we're having major issues. Now, I'm not going to go back in history. I mean, again, the idea is some people say, well, wait a second, people have lived there in the past, they have a right to go back there. Well, how far are we going to go back? Are we going to go back to pre-1300 BC? Are we going to go back to the cavemen or the Neolithic era, or what are we going to do? There have been many, many groups that have actually been and conquered and occupied Palestine. You had the Assyrians, you had the Babylonians, you had the Persians, you had the Romans, you had so many different groups that came in and existed there for some period of time, including you had a Jewish a period where they lived there as well. As a Muslim, I believe in the different prophets. Solomon and David and all of these individuals are people that we as Muslims look to as being prophets, and we regard them as being very, very important. So we're not going to deny their existence, nor the fact that Jews had a presence in this area. There's no denying that whatsoever. What I want to touch upon, though, is the issue of the Muslim period. And this becomes, and I'll explain why, because Muslims came into the area of Jerusalem in around 638. The Caliph Omar, one of the four, they call him the rightly guided caliphs, came and was asked to come by the patriarch, the Byzantine patriarch, to Jerusalem to accept the keys. There was obviously wars and issues going on between the Byzantines and the Persian or Sassanid Empire and the Muslims. The Muslims were given, the Caliph Omar was given the key to Jerusalem. Now, while he was in Jerusalem, he was looking for, he wanted to actually build the site of a mosque, because in the Muslim narrative, there was an event in Muslim history where the Prophet, peace be upon him, Muhammad, Muslims believe, ascended to heaven from this particular location in Jerusalem. And the Caliph Omar wanted to establish a mosque at that location. So he looked for the location. It was basically a garbage dump that was there at the time. And he decided this is where, you found out this is where the Prophet had ascended at the time, and this is where I want to actually build the mosque. Now, some people say, oh, there used to be a Jewish temple there. Yeah, there was a temple, the first one that was destroyed by the Assyrians, the second one that was destroyed by the Romans. When did the Romans destroy the second temple? It was in the year 70. When did Muslims then come in? I mean, we're talking about 600 years later. There's nothing there 600 years later. I mean, if you go back from where we are 600 years, you're talking about the time of Christopher Columbus. Okay, so when Muslims established their presence there and they created the dome of the mosque, and this is, you'll see, this is the Al-Haram al-Sharif. It's called the Noble Sanctuary. This was created in the late 600s and the early 700s by Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, Muslim leaders and so forth. They established a presence there. Now, Muslims have continued to exist there except for a small period of time during the Crusades. And I'm saying a small period of time because 87 years is a small period when you look at it historically. Eventually, Saladin, or what Muslims say is Salah ad-Din, actually liberated the Holy Land. When the Crusades were there, they did not allow Muslims or Jews into Jerusalem. When Salah ad-Din came in, he actually allowed the Jewish community back into Jerusalem. Similarly, and I forgot to mention this earlier, when the Caliph Omar received the key of Jerusalem from the Patriarch Sophronius, similarly, the Patriarch wanted to make sure that Jews were not allowed back into Jerusalem. They had been banned from Jerusalem. Obviously, there had been conflict between these different religious groups. Despite that, the Muslims allowed the Jews to come back into Jerusalem. So that's now twice that the Muslims actually allowed them to come back, because Muslims recognize Christians and Jews of people of Scripture, and they recognize their holy sites, and they recognize the fact that they are people who worship God, and that is something that's very important. Now, it's also important to note that even during the Spanish Reconquista, when Jews and Muslims were being forced out of Spain, where did many of the Jews go? They actually went to the Muslim countries in North Africa. That's why you oftentimes had a very large presence of Jews in North Africa. The reason I'm bringing all this up is this is not something about Muslims and Jews or Palestinians and Jews. Muslims have respected Jews and people of the scripture for centuries. It's part embedded in our religious scriptures. We cannot deny Moses or Jesus or their followers or the Torah or the Bible and say that, hey, we are going to reject them or curse Mary or curse any of. That is not something that Muslims do. But this is not a religious issue. There were actually Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Christians that continue to exist during this time. If you look at some of the oldest religious buildings, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, they continue to exist under Muslim rule for 1,300 years. If Muslims were against that, they would have destroyed it easily when they were the majority. But they allowed them to continue and to prosper. Now, some people go back and say, hey, look, there were issues. Muslims weren't always very nice. You know what? Things happen in history. Absolutely, Muslims, and there were certain Muslim rulers that were not great and others were very good. But they did not have the idea of nations and citizenship that we have right now. So sometimes we use our current understanding of how societies are structured to judge people at that time. If you want to judge the people at that time, judge them based on what were going on, for example, in Europe with Christians and Jews at the time. How were Jews treated in many of these countries? How were other communities treated in these countries? So Muslims continued to allow these different groups in, and Muslims were, they continued to have the overall leadership, if you want to call it, in these societies, whether it was under the Mamluks or whether it was later under the Ottomans. There were different dynasties. None of these dynasties kicked the people out. They didn't say to the Christians, you don't belong here. They didn't say to the Jews, you don't belong here. They didn't say this is an exclusive Muslim thing that only Muslims should be here. That did not happen. Okay? And this is something that's very, very important because it allowed different communities to live and to thrive together. So Muslims, again, with exception of the Crusades, and with Christians and Jews who all regarded themselves as Palestinian. Arabic was their lingua franca. They worshipped in different places, but they were neighbors with one another. They interacted with one another. They went to schools with one another. They ate dinners with one another. This is how they actually happened to live for a very long period of time. Unfortunately, what had happened was that after the creation of Israel in 1948, this is where we have some problems and things that lead up to the creation of Israel as well. And I'm going to have to move a little faster. So here, for example, you had some Jewish presence in Jerusalem in the early 1900s. If you even look at the way they're dressed, again, it was basically a Palestinian attire because that was their culture. It was a Palestinian culture that they had adopted. This here is in Nazareth. Again, this is not like this was some backwater. You know, the idea is, hey, this is a land without people for a people without land. This is what the Zionist community tried to sell to the world, that there was really nobody there. And so the Jews, they don't have a country. So, hey, let's just bring them all together. That was not true. It was a prosperous country. This is a picture of Jerusalem in the 1940s. So where did the problem start? Well, the problem started, there was a movement called the Zionist movement, which decided that, again, it was established in the late 1800s, and they decided that they wanted to find or establish a Jewish home, our home for Jews, okay? So Theodor Herzl wrote Der Judenstaat, and he said, hey, it could be anywhere. Actually, Theodor Herzl, if you read his diaries, actually favored Uganda. Eventually, with the other members of the Zionist community, they decided to pick Palestine. So now, what was the reason that was given? Well, this was sold by the Zionist movement, and there's hundreds of quotes that I can give you. It was sold as part of a colonialist enterprise that the Jews were going to bring the civilization to these people, just like the other colonial powers, the French and the British and others were claiming that they were doing in various countries. They also brought up that Jews were facing pogroms and discrimination in different countries, whether in Russia or other areas, and that they believed, Herzl believed, that it was impossible for Jews to really be integrated in societies and that they needed to have then their own state because Jews would never be accepted. Now again, maybe that was a valid idea at that time because of the discrimination and other things that Jews were experiencing. The problem now that differed the Palestinian Jews from the Zionist Jews is the Zionist Jews didn't come to Palestine because they wanted to live with the Palestinians. They wanted to live instead of the Palestinians. They developed the idea of transfer. And again, there's many quotes. Joseph Weitz, who was part of the Zionist colonization project, actually said, we want to try to help the people cross the border, get them out of this particular country. This idea of transfer or ethnic cleansing or whatever you want to call it, this was part of the part and parcel of what the Zionist movement was actually advocating from the very beginning. Of course, to make room for the Jewish community to come in, you have to somehow pump out the current population that's actually there. And so you have to find a way to actually do that. Of course, the Palestinians resisted that. They resisted it over many years. The problem is that the British, after World War I, because this was all under the Ottoman Empire, the British were going to take control as part of the UN mandate system. So what happened was much of the Ottoman Empire was going to be divided among the British and the French, and actually even the Russians before the Tsarist Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution. So there was this idea, oh, you know what, let's give the French, the Lebanon area to the French, let's give Palestine and Transjordan to the British, and on and on. The British, now even before they took control, they created what was called the Balfour Declaration, where the Foreign Secretary of Britain promised to one of the Zionist leaders, Chaim Weizmann, that they are going to try to help them create a Jewish state in Palestine. Now, question to ask is, did you ask the Palestinians what their thoughts were? Of course not. Okay? These are the Palestinians. They're considered these third world savages. These are people that we could do anything to. We don't have to confer with the indigenous people there. We basically do what we want with them. So one country, which is Britain, offered a Zionist movement, a group, which actually did not have a lot of support at that time from the Jewish community worldwide. They offered them the land of another people, which were the Palestinians. Okay? This was part of the problem. Now, the British were also promising the Arabs, this is right before World War I, that if you Arabs help us fight the Ottomans, that we will give you freedom and we will give you guys independence. Obviously, colonial powers were giving multiple promises to various groups. Eventually, the League of Nations gave the British the mandate for Palestine. It means that they were supposed to help these Palestinians achieve independence. And the problem, though, was they also allowed many Western Jews to come in. And again, these were the Zionist Jews. These are the ones that did want to live in Palestine, not with the Palestinians, but they wanted the Palestinians out. So they created groups like the Haganah and the Irgun and the Stern Gang. These were all considered by the British to actually be terrorist groups. And the leaders of many of these terrorist groups later on actually became prime ministers of Israel. Yitzhak Shamir, Menachem Begin, and others who were part of these terrorist groups. Again, they were regarded as terrorists by the British and others. They had their pictures up as wanted. They committed major acts of terrorism, and later on they became leaders of Israel. So what happened was, obviously, Zionist terrorism intensifies in Palestine. Even the British Minister of State was assassinated in Cairo. The King David Hotel, which was the headquarters for the British, was blown up in Jerusalem. Again, these are all factual things. This is in addition to their attacks against Palestinians and Palestinian towns and villages and so forth. This is something that they needed because they wanted to establish something, whether it was with the consent of the British and the Palestinians or without. What eventually happened was the British said, you know what, we can't deal with this anymore. They wanted to refer it back to the United Nations. United Nations created a group called the UNSCOP, United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. They had different ideas. What are you going to do? What they decide in the end, hey, the easiest thing to do is let's divide this into two states. That was the majority proposal. The majority proposal was this. So you had in the orangish color all the way throughout there, that would become the Jewish state, which included all of the most fertile land along the coast. Remember, Palestine wasn't dead. There wasn't like there was no farming and agriculture. This was always part of the Fertile Crescent. The Palestinians were actually exporting oranges and other things to Europe and other countries for decades before the Israelis actually came in. The yellow part was designated for the Palestinian state. Now, what's interesting is 43% of Palestine, which belonged to the Palestinians, was going to be given to the Palestinians as their state, and about 56% was going to be given to the Jewish state, even though they owned less than 10% of the land after 30 some years of trying to purchase land. And even though after over 300,000 immigrants had been brought in from Europe over a period of several decades, they still represented only less than 1/3 of the population. Okay? But this was considered to be fair. Well, the Palestinians said, wait a second, nobody asked us about this. You're bringing in people from outside. You're asking them, you're dividing. It's kind of like Solomon and his baby, okay? Where he went to the, I don't know if you guys know the story about, you know, each mom said that, oh, this is our child. And so Solomon, said, okay, here, let me take this sword and I will cut this child in half. And the mom said, no. Let the other one have it. I don't want this baby. And he knew that that was the mom, okay? Because the mom obviously cared about her baby. Again, this is in various religious traditions a story. Palestinians said, how are we going to give up our land to people who just came from Europe and who don't even want to live with us? Okay, how is this fair or reasonable? How is this going to be taken care of? Now, how was this achieved? Well, it was supposed to go to the United Nations. Now, James Forrestal, and I'm not going to quote all of this stuff because I'm trying to finish quickly. James Forrestal said that the pressure that the United States government was putting on other countries, if you go to his diaries, bordered closely on scandal. Okay, and he said no group in this country should be permitted to influence our policy to the point it could endanger our national security. Eventually, it was a vote of 33-13. Although the UN General Assembly really doesn't have the power or the authority to divide other countries. Between the time that this resolution was, November 29, 1947, until Israel was declared a state in May of 1948, the paramilitary groups, the terrorist groups that were allowed to come in and were allowed to arm themselves, and part of them were actually, there was even the British had a force, there was other military, that they allowed them to get weapons from outside, tanks and even airplanes. So what happened is they started attacking Palestinian towns and villages. Some of the Palestinian towns and villages, major massacres. What do you think happened when these major massacres took place? Well, the people began to flee. So you had Deir Yassin, you had Tantura, you had others. I have a video here. I don't know if, press it again. So, is the volume off? Anyways, so this is an Israeli director interviewed soldiers who were part of these different Jewish groups, and they were saying, again, it's a 2022 documentary. You can download it or whatever else. He talks about how people were massacred, Palestinians were massacred. They took them. They were actually laughing about it. It was joking about it. He talked about, a couple of them talked about how girls were being raped. Okay? Again, these are Israeli soldiers talking about what they did in the Nakba, part of the occupation of Palestine. Okay? The reason that this is important is, what do you think the Palestinian collective consciousness in Gaza is thinking about right now? When you had Israeli leaders such as Avi Dichter and others who are saying, we are going to do and unroll the next Nakba, the next ethnic cleansing. Okay? And that's exactly what they're doing, and that is exactly what's going on. Again, these are, I'm going to just go through some of these slides real quickly. Even the UN mediator, UN Council Bernadotte, who I think was Swedish, was actually, when he was sent to be as a mediator, guess what? He was killed by the Jewish terrorist groups at that time. Again, we're talking about, where did terrorism come from? How did this come about? How did the transfer of all these Palestinians come about? 770,000 Palestinians were either forced to flee or fled because of war. Under international law, anyone who flees a conflict or is forced has the right to go back, and it's an individual right. 80% of the people in Gaza are originally from homes and towns in what is Israel. So imagine, so imagine that these individuals who look over this fence that Israel has created, and they have them like a prison or a concentration camp where you're just concentrating more and more people and not giving them any of their rights, and basically abusing them in every possible way for their entire life. And they look over the fence and they see their orchards, and they see their lands, and they see their houses. If you see the symbol, Palestinians oftentimes have a key, an old metal key. It's because they say, we have homes. We have the deeds to our properties. And they look and they see a group of people who came from anywhere around the world can go and live in their home, and they're not allowed to return. And that's the essence of the problem. So I, as a Palestinian, I was actually born there. I came here. I'm now an American citizen. But I was born in Palestine. If I wanted to go back and say, hey, I have a right to go back, I live there, I am denied that right. Now, for me, I'm living happily in the United States. But what if you are one of the 80% of the refugees that are living in Gaza that has been under Israeli occupation and siege? Okay? You don't have that opportunity. You don't have the opportunity to go and live a life of freedom. You're subjugated. You're humiliated. You're abused. You're terrorized. You're constantly attacked. In June of 1967 was the next war. Israel occupied the rest of the West Bank and Gaza, and that's what I'm saying. When they occupied the West Bank and Gaza, that is what they have been controlling now militarily since 1967. All those people who are out there saying, oh, you know what, this is something important, this was a huge tragedy on October 7th. Yes, it was. But you've been inflicting these tragedies on Palestinians every single year for the last how many decades? Why did nobody say something about it? Where was your conscience then when people were being attacked and killed and pummeled in every possible way? Where was the conscience of the world? Where was the humanity there? When Palestinians said, let's try, let's do what we can, nothing happened. And I know that I'm getting I'll go over this, what are the possibilities. I just want to real quickly go over some more about Gaza. 2.3 million, half of them are children. 80%, like I said, were forced out of what was Palestine and became Israel. You know, Israel says, oh, the Palestinians want to destroy us. They want to push us into the sea. That's exactly what they did to the Palestinians. There was no Israel in 1947. There was a Palestine. Palestine doesn't exist and it's not on any maps anymore because the Palestinians were pushed into the sea. They were pushed into Gaza, into other countries. And Israelis say, oh, why didn't the Arab countries just take them in? And you know what? That's like me saying, I'm going to kick you out of the United States and you're sitting on the border of Mexico or Canada. And I say, hey, you know what? There's a lot of English-speaking countries you can go to. I want to go back to my country, to my home, to my land, to my orchards. This is the problem. Palestinians have not been allowed to return, even though UN resolutions, international law, everything calls for it. But the problem is, I'll be finished in just a minute. The problem is that no one is being serious about it, especially our government. Our government has vetoed dozens of UN resolutions that call for an equitable solution, including a two-state solution. All the Arab countries, every about year, a couple of years, there's a resolution that comes up about the resolution of this in the United Nations, and it says based on the 1967 border and whatever else, and every year the United States government vetoes it. So where are you? I mean, are Palestinians not human beings? And then what's going on in Gaza? And I'm going to finish with this. Between 2008 and 2021, actually, Palestinians are not allowed to leave. They are in Gaza, even though the Israelis say, hey, you know, we kind of pulled back a little bit, but they control the borders, they control the airspace, they control the water, they control everything. Between September of 2000 and October 7th of 2023, when the Hamas attack against Israel took place, between those years, 7,569 Palestinians were murdered in Gaza. 1,699 were children. Where was the outcry? Are they not human beings? Do they not cry? Do they not have families? Do they not? I mean, what is it? Why? And why is this allowed to go on? I mean, I'm especially bothered when members of the pro-Israeli community who will speak out for any particular offense or whatever, but when it comes to what's going on in Israel, you stay silent. And in fact, you don't just stay silent, you continue to lobby in support of Israel, no matter how extreme their government is. And right now, you have a very extreme government. Anyways, I'm going to stop here, and I'm sorry. I told you I was very ambitious about what I would cover, and I ended up covering maybe 90% of it. So, thank you.
Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing those history lessons and challenging all of us. We're going to ask some questions similar to those posed to last week's speaker. You referenced at the outset, in your mind, there is a resolution, a peaceful and just resolution potential. And then towards the end, you talk about the potential two-state solution. If possible, what does it take?
I think a lot of people will tell you, including a lot of Israelis, that the two-state solution, especially liberal Israelis, that the two-state solution is no longer possible because of the fact that the Israeli government, especially these right-wing governments, have continued to bring in and build Israeli settlers in the land, in that 22% of Palestine that was supposed to go for the Palestinian state. Just so everyone is aware, when the Palestinian Authority made a historical compromise, they said that we recognize Israel, but we want to have a Palestinian state in the 22% of original Palestine, West Bank and Gaza. And that is also what the UN resolutions that keep coming up say. But the Israelis say no, especially the right wing. Oh, God gave us this land. We need to put more settlements there. So since even Oslo, which was supposed to be the basis of the two-state solution, when you have hundreds of thousands of extremist Jewish settlers, and I'll tell you, for the Jewish members of the community here, you would not want to live with these individuals. I don't think that you would tolerate them, and yet they are in Palestinian areas, and they are, even now in the West Bank, killing Palestinians with the support and the assistance of the Israeli army. So, is a two-state solution possible? A lot of people are saying it's not. So what's the alternative? Well, the Israelis say we don't want a one-state solution. And this is where the issue of apartheid comes out. Because they say if the Palestinians become the majority, if we incorporate the West Bank and even Gaza, that, hey, the Jews will become a minority in Israel, and then they will vote to have a democratic state, and then we will not have any of our privileges anymore. Kind of like South Africa. And so that's not possible, not because the Palestinians don't want it, but because Israeli Jews are saying, hey, we want to have and want to maintain a Jewish state. Well, you're not going to be able to maintain it if you have a major population that is not Jewish and who doesn't want to be discriminated against. So what has happened is we keep just maintaining the status quo. Israel keeps going in with their military, abusing, subjugating, occupying. This has been a dark stain, I believe, on the Jewish community that supports what Israel is doing. But I will tell you, in this issue that has been going on since October 7th, I have been absolutely amazed by the number of Jewish individuals from a wide variety of groups who are advocating for the rights of Palestinians and who are more firm in their statements about the rights of the Palestinians than you will find even many Palestinians. And I will say kudos to them, because in my view, that is what is a representation of the true values of Judaism.
This touches on that similar theme that you were ending with. Is it possible, I think you would say yes, to express concern and extend humanitarian aid to the Palestinians without being labeled anti-Semitic?
You know, unfortunately in my slides, I didn't get to the human catastrophe, the disaster that is taking place in Gaza. 70% of buildings, homes, schools, nurseries, cultural centers have been destroyed. Close to 30,000 innocent people dead. 2/3 of them women and children, actually 70%. Israel is using water and food as an instrument of war by banning water and food and fuel supplies and medicine and bombing hospitals. This is unconscionable. This is unconscionable that this would happen. And I will make it very clear, when I go out, I will say, if someone sees something that like this that is going on, I will echo my Jewish brothers and sisters who, when we are in protest, they say, never again. We said never again. That also applies to the Palestinians. But most people, unfortunately, are just silent. Our leaders, not just silent, we're funding them. We give them $4 billion a year. We give them arms. We do whatever else. This is a human issue. You want thousands of people to die, and now because of disease, they're drinking dirty water or salt water from the sea because they don't have access to clean water. The doctors are saying they don't have anesthetics. They're doing amputations and surgeries, including C-sections for pregnant women, without anesthetics or painkillers. This is the 20th century or 21st century. I mean, are we really tolerating that?
What is the risk of an expanded war, and what can be done to prevent the expansion?
Look, we didn't have to have the attack by Hamas. There was no reason for it at all. If there was a settlement that was reached decades ago to the Palestinian conflict, a fair and just settlement, there would be no war. Hamas would not have any basis to resist. Resistance wouldn't need to exist if you were not being subjugated. Resistance arises when people are living under oppressive circumstances. It happened in Africa, it happened in Asia, and colonialists and occupiers and oppressors never seem to understand that more brutality will only breed more resistance. The only way is to have a fair and just resolution. Give Palestinians their dignity, give them their freedom, give them the right to have their own country. If you have that, I guarantee you that nobody among Palestinians is going to support any kind of resistance, because at that point, it's a mute issue. We have our own country.
Last question. Again, thank you for being here today with us. What's happening behind the scenes that we aren't seeing, the media that you referenced, the TikToks, the CNNs, the other outlets?
You know, this is, and again, I will be honest, and I know this may offend people, but I will tell you, I agree with South Africa's bringing this issue to the International Court of Justice. We were proud supporters against South African apartheid. Nelson Mandela was a supporter, one of the strongest supporters of the Palestinian cause. Desmond Tutu is one of the strongest supporters, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, of the Palestinian cause. What's going on right now, though, Israel stopped the media from going in there unless they were embedded with the military. So here you have CNN or Fox going with an Israeli, in an Israeli tank, and you have all these, propaganda and whatever. And then you have Palestinians on the ground who are working as journalists, who are risking everything, and they're putting it on social media. And we are seeing a live genocide. I mean, I actually had, unfortunately, there's no time for it. I actually had a couple of videos, not gruesome, just things that I wanted to show you, because it's being recorded. How has Israel responded? It's killed intentionally over 115 journalists, including attacking their homes and killing their entire families. It has killed more UN workers than has been in any conflict in the history of the UN, and this is only in the last 2 months. It has killed physicians and their entire families, poets, artists. These are being intentionally targeted because Israel controls actually the civil registry in Gaza. So when they're attacking these homes, they know exactly who they are attacking. I think social media has made a huge difference. And I'll tell you what the problem is for Israel. Israel's lies are no longer being believed. People see with their own eyes. So when you had that Hagari, or the army spokesman, in the tunnel, and he said, this is a list of the hostage names, the Hamas names, and they're holding hostages. And then someone on Instagram says, excuse me, I just read it. That's just a calendar, and what you pointed out are the days of the month in Arabic. Okay? When their lies are being exposed about everything, oh yeah, we're allowing humanitarian aid in, but 6 of the biggest organizations, humanitarian organization, Oxfam and others, say that's not true. When we see exactly what's going on, this is bringing the reality to people's phones. And in the long run, if Israel feels that it can maintain its occupation, it is wrong. Not only will the Palestinians continue to resist and stand up for their freedom and their dignity, but now, as you see around the world, there's demonstrations in every country of the world in support of the rights of the Palestinians who've been denied their rights in cases for 75 years. Okay? If Palestinians don't have their rights, I don't believe that they'll ever have peace. Either you're going to have to eliminate all the Palestinians, or you're going to have to find a peaceful, just resolution. But with our government, and I'll tell you, I'm equally against Republicans and Democrats on this issue. With our government, they don't have the courage, I was going to use a different word, to stand up for what is right and just for our principles, our country's principles, and for international law of justice. We're a nation of laws. We should be following the laws, not using the diplomatic channels to allow these kind of tragedies and this oppression to continue. So thank you.
Thank you very much.